Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Control Port Podcast, episode 362. My name is Benjamin Yoder, here today after a catastrophe happened. I'm here talking to you about video games, though. But before we talk about video games, so if you don't know, I've got two main PCs in my house. I got a secondary one, that's my old PC that I got in like 2016, and then I also have the main PC that we bought, us as a community bought. It was partly related to wanting to capture things a little bit more reliably, especially when streaming, and now I don't stream anymore. But I bought a new PC a couple years back, and I consistently have had some problems with it off and on. I have a lot of thoughts on why that may or may not be, but I had a real problem with it where it just straight blew up. So, not blew up, I exaggerate. It didn't boot anymore, so I had to go through a whole process with that. So I'm on a new, I had to go through a ton of troubleshooting with it. Spent basically 4 to 5 days trying to figure out what's going on. And now I'm here. I had to reformat the machine and everything too. So it's very exciting. So in saying that, the reason I'm bringing that up immediately is because I haven't really tried to fine tune anything here in terms of audio recording or anything like that. So I don't know how this sounds. Hopefully it sounds fine. Not that I'm great at audio in general, but yeah. So if anything happens during the show this week, my apologies. Still working things out. I just re-downloaded GIMP because I was trying to open a GIMP file and was like, oh wait, I haven't installed it. So yeah, but this week it's gonna be kind of a light week in terms of topics. So I think what we're gonna do is the Game Awards happened. I want to talk a little bit about that. There's one news story I wanted to talk about just because I thought the game was doing something kind of interesting. And then I think what we're gonna do. So if you don't know, next real podcast is going to be the Game of the Year podcast, right? Does that check out? Yes, that checks out. It's going to be the Game of the Year podcast. So the reason why I'm saying that, is that right? 16? Yeah, okay, the 30th. Okay, so on January 30th, we're going to have, or December 30th, we're going to have our Game of the Year show. And I still need to make the categories for that. But I feel like those shows usually are pretty tight on time. So I think we're just going to kind of do an end of the year wrap up on the channel and stuff and just kind of do a little review. I think these used to be separate videos that we did, but honestly, especially since we have a kind of a quiet show this week, I think it makes sense to just kind of wrap it in here. So in the second half of the show, I'm just going to talk about various projects I worked on this year and kind of how I feel about them and kind of what was good and what was bad about them and stuff like that. So if you're interested in the One Controller Port business review, here we are. We'll do that. So anyways, but yeah, quick reminder though, if you want to provide a Game of the Year category for the Game of the Year show, this next week will be your time to do it. So on December 23rd, I'll be cutting off the category probably. But if you have anything you want me to answer for the Game of the Year category, let me know. Again, try to keep it broad if you can. Don't sit there and be like, what are your favorite RPGs this year, Ben? Because I just don't play enough games, unfortunately, to accommodate that kind of stuff. But if you're more general things between games, what was your favorite game mechanic this year? Who was your favorite character? What was the best game fashion this year? Those kind of things, right? These more broad categories. Hopefully that's a little bit more specific. I think last week I kind of stumbled over myself trying to explain what I meant by keeping things a little broad. So yeah, but otherwise I'll be making my own categories otherwise, but I'd be really happy to hear what you have. And just, message me on Twitter, Discord, Blue Sky, wherever you want to. Let me know. Or in the comments. This video goes on YouTube, and you can leave a comment. So, very exciting. So, that being said, the industry-wide Game Awards happened this, I don't know, Thursday? Is that what it was? This last Thursday? I am at the point with these shows where I don't really watch them live that much. I just finished it here now on Saturday in the afternoon because they're long shows and just kind of keep them on in the background and stuff like that. Just kind of talk about a handful of games on there that kind of grabbed my eye in various ways. The Haze Light game, Split Fiction. I was looking at that. If you don't remember, I'm a big fan of Haze Light's the first co-op game they did. I don't know if it's their first game. I think they had a Brothers game or something like that before that. But A Way Out, I think that was a really fun and good game. I don't remember. I think we talked about it on the podcast forever ago. and I played It Takes Two, and I did not like It Takes Two nearly as much. But their whole gimmick is that basically it's a split screen game, whether it's online or offline, and you only need to buy one copy of the game to play with somebody else. So if you want to play with a friend online, they just have to download a client and then they can play with you, kind of thing. They're really cool games in that they definitely focus on trying to get the players to kind of like engage with each other in interesting ways. I think It Takes Two, while a much better game than A Way Out, I think did not play with it in nearly as fun of ways. I think it felt like more of a traditional mechanic kind of game. So I kind of lost interest after It Takes Two in this new game, Split Fiction. I mean, they're doing the same thing again, and I think I just kind of got what I needed out of A Way Out back in the day. And I think in some ways I was hoping It Takes Two would feel a little bit more different, but I think it's just like there's a lot of things about It Takes Two that are different from the baseline game, but I think just like structurally they feel very similar in a lot of ways, and it looks like Split Fiction is a very similar thing. And if you know me, you listen to the show, you know that at some point I'm just kind of like, okay, if you're doing this again, I don't really need to be here for that, I will say. So I will say, though, I am super thankful for Hazelight showing actual gameplay in their trailer. I feel really bad because I feel like a lot of the Game Awards for me right now is a trailer for a game is shown, and I don't know what the game is. Like, I guess I get your aesthetics, I get your world, but like gameplay-wise, I don't know what you're showing me. And I mean, I'm not saying this isn't true for other shows as well, but Game Awards in specific, just like, I don't know, like Yu Suzuki showed his game and it's like an anime girl, and I'm like, okay, well, what is this game? And like nothing is shown. The new Ico Shadow of the Colossus game got shown, and like it kind of bothered me. I had to go back and listen, but like I'm pretty sure leading into it, Jeff Keighley was like, "Oh, we're gonna show you in-game footage," but I guess what that really just means is that like it's rendered in-game, it's not actual gameplay. And like it's fine. Like I guess like tonally it's kind of nice. There's like the weird tidal wave kind of thing coming in, or tsunami kind of thing coming in. And then also like Okami is just like, okay, like all these games are just like, okay, I when you're ready to show me your video game, I'm on board to look at it. But it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's really hard for me to get interested in your game if you're not going to tell me about your video game. But I think at some point, I'm not very excited about certain specific brands very much. I think you really have to kind of catch me off guard for me to really be excited just based off a name alone kind of thing. The one exception actually in this regard is Naughty Dog. They had a game called Intergalactic, and it was just a CG trailer for the most part. But I will say this. Naughty Dog has been doing a very similar type of video game for a very long time, right? What was it? Last of Us was like 2016. Almost 10 years of us playing The Last of Us. It's just nice seeing them do something different. And, I don't really know if I have any faith from a mechanics perspective that'll be like super interesting, but what they're doing looks different than The Last of Us. And even The Last of Us, in my opinion, was a little too close to Uncharted in some ways. This game looks like they're really trying to create something new. New for them, I should say, at the very least. So I think that's really cool. And I think that's like one of the most excited I've ever been for a Naughty Dog game. That doesn't mean that I'm going to play it. Just like, or maybe I should say it caught my interest kind of thing, right? I think that was like really, really good. So I'm glad that game really kind of showed off that it was like, hey, this is not just going to be The Last of Us, or at least the CG trailer, I feel like gave you that information that it's just not going to be The Last of Us. Sometimes conveying that I think could be a little hard. So another game that showed up in the Game Awards is I think it's called Project Century, or like 1915 or something like that, and it is a game from the Yakuza devs, or Like a Dragon devs, and it has a really cool kind of like a 1915 setting, right? And it's got like a very like, I don't know how to put it, very like weird traditional Japan look. I don't know the words. I don't know what words I'm looking for, but it's got a traditional Japan look from that time frame, period appropriate. I feel like that time frame of Japan may not, I mean, I don't know much about Japanese history, so I don't know how like accurate it is to actual time frame Japan, but it's like this weird like mix of like, it kind of looks like San Francisco, Japan in some ways. And I don't know how real or not real that is. Because like in my head, when I think of like old Japan, I think of like a very specific kind of like feudal Japan kind of thing. I don't feel like I think too much about like pre-World War II Japan that much, right? I don't really know what that looks like. When there's like there's a more yeah, I just don't know much about that time in Japan's history. So I think that's really cool. And when it comes from the gameplay perspective, I feel like Yakuza games are very like beat 'em up-y. Even like the more recent ones I've seen, they just seem very like beat 'em up-y in a way that they're kind of loose in how they control and just kind of mashy. And this game just seems to make the combat a little bit more direct, right? I saw some people say like it's Dark Souls Yakuza. I don't know. I feel like we're at the point now where like action combat has evolved in a way that like this kind of like more grounded style combat system, like calling it just Dark Souls all the time, is kind of like a weird thing to do. I say this as somebody who hasn't really played a lot of games like that, but I feel like there just needs to be a different like way to communicate about what that combat is. But either way, I thought it looked neat. But the struggle I had is that it does like gameplay wise, I can tell kind of what's different. Setting wise, I can kind of tell what's different. But I think one of the biggest struggles for me with Yakuza is the structure of the game. I feel like I know what a Yakuza game's going to play like in terms of how you move around that world, what's in that world, and all that kind of stuff. And like, we've talked in the past before about Kamurocho and like, that being something, a space that I'm not like particularly interested in anymore. But I think maybe the bigger thing is also the way you navigate cities in Yakuza games. I think it's just a little stagnant for me. I think they're cool, don't get me wrong, but I think there's like the scale of those games all feel very similar to me. And when I see future games like Judgment and the later Yakuza games, all of them feel like they're similar scales, similar layouts, similar types of, environments and all that stuff. And like, when I mean that, I mean like a purely functional kind of thing of how you navigate that world. And this is like a very vague thing to talk about. So sorry if this is like comes off as like completely incomprehensible. And I don't feel like Project Century or 1915 or whatever it's called, really in that trailer, it was able to convey that is not the case. If it's not the case, I don't know, it might be that case. But I don't know how you do that in a trailer. I feel like that is like, that needs a more like extended gameplay session for you to really like be able to tell. This trailer was very much focused on combat and setting. Those are the kind of the two things. So, I was interested in the game, but it is really hard for me to get like super interested in, what's that studio called? Ryugaku, whatever, or something. That studio, just like not many of their games really jump out at me anymore. I do feel like they kind of maybe lean a little too close to, like, even this game, I think still leans a little too close to Yakuza than I would like. But, well, maybe I should say the perception I have is that it leans a little too close for Yakuza. That doesn't mean that's necessarily true. So, but I'm interested in taking a look at it, maybe, or like considering it more, maybe I should say. The one game that I think really did kind of look kind of interesting to me was like, there's like a game with like Kiryu on like a ship, like a casino ship. I don't know how much of that game was set on that casino ship, but the idea of that game being very focused in a very small location, is appealing to me. I think I had read that you then leave the casino ship and go to like Kamurocho again, which I don't care about. I don't know for sure though. But that game always kind of looked kind of neat. There is like a pirate Yakuza game as well, which I have not looked at all. I have no idea what that game looks like beyond I've seen Majima with a pirate hat on. So that's about it. I probably should look at that game a little bit more. There's a lot of those kind of games though now. So I feel a little bad because I bought that Yakuza collection and really all I did was play Yakuza 3. But I feel like Yakuza 3 was like a really high point for that series for me, and like very little about the Yakuza series has like looked very appealing after Yakuza 3. Not that Yakuza 3 didn't have its problems, but still. And then the last thing was there's an Onimusha game, and I forget if it was gameplay or a cinematic trailer for this one. I think the weird thing that stood out to me about it, and keep in mind, Onimusha, PS2 game series, and I believe has not had an entry since the PS2. It looks a little generic. I feel like in my head, Onimusha has a particular style to it, but in looking back at those games, I don't actually know if that's true. It might just be that like aesthetically they had a particular look because they're on the PS2. But this game just kind of looks kind of whatever. I don't know. I think part of the problem is that there's a lot of these kind of like feudal Japan games now, like Rise of the Ronin and stuff like that. And what's the Sucker Punch one? Ghost of Tsushima. Like and a lot of them just look very similar to me, and that's not to say they are similar. It's just hard for me to tell them apart, really. Um, and so when I see Onimusha kind of fitting within that, maybe a little bit more like a darker look and feel than that, and obviously Onimusha is more about like demons and stuff. I don't know what Rise of the Ronin is from a like what you're fighting kind of thing, but this feels like kind of like halfway between like the Ghost of Tsushima and Neo. It kind of feels like it's like in between there kind of thing. And I don't know, it just kind of looked at me. I kind of like, I was just kind of like, okay, that's fine. Admittedly, I have never played an Onimusha game. And so when I think about what I want to do with the Onimusha franchise, I am thinking about Onimusha for the PS2. So adding a new entry in the Onimusha series for me is not really important. So cool if you are looking forward to that, though. I'm very excited for you if you want that. And also, I think the game, I think it's called like Kunitsu Gami, the Path of the Goddess. That came out earlier this year, and I think that looks way more up my alley. So if I were to play a game by Capcom in that kind of look and style, obviously it's a very different style of game in terms of being more tower defensey. I think that game would be the one that I'd play if it was a more modern game kind of thing. So, but yeah, it seems like people are pretty happy with the Game Awards. I just kind of get stuck on the what kind of trailers get me excited at the Game Awards. Very rarely is it. I feel like is it the stuff that I'm actually interested in. And I think a lot of times just because like the trailers just kind of are not interesting. Like because they're just like here's what the world looks like. Okami looks like an Okami trailer, and it is very much hedging on the you just care about Okami kind of thing, which, hey, guess what? I did not like Okami back in the day when I was a kid, but I have not played it since. And also have not played Okami then, so. And I guess, like, as somebody who's been playing these games for so long, like part of me is like, oh yeah, someday I'd love to play Okami Den. So adding another Okami entry doesn't really help me. If you're just promising more Okami, right? If you're just saying we're gonna make another Okami, I'm like, well, guess what? I have a DS one that I haven't played still. So the puppy's cute in that game. So, if anything, I think Okami Den, like conceptually, I still think like the smaller, compact version to kind of reflect the platform it's on is like a cute idea, right? Not that that's like foreign entirely, but I feel like the game kind of more literally takes that. How tiny can we make the character from Okami and Chibi and stuff to fit on the DS kind of thing? So, I was thinking for Hot Pot Gaming, maybe trying to contact somebody who might be more into like the commentary stuff around this stuff and try to better understand like how they view these kind of showcases and stuff. A friend of mine mentioned that the expectation is a little bit more in line with like movie and TV award shows. And I've never really watched those. And so they were wondering if I was too focused on like E3 kind of presentations, which I will say I love charts and bars of old E3, right? And like I watched that Sony investor meeting, and I would much rather watch a Sony investor meeting rather than the Game Awards. But I think the actual show, Snoop Dogg coming on stage and singing or whatever, is fine. That stuff is all fine to me. Like, that's not really my problem. I think it is very much the trailers of the game itself. So, like, what are the priorities of these trailers, and why do they work the way they work? I thought it was really interesting as well because, like, when Matsuhiro Sakurai has his YouTube channel, I think he has a video about making game trailers, and like his thing is like show your gameplay as soon as possible. And I feel like nearly every game trailer I see goes against that. Now, Matsuhiro Sakurai is not the end all be all of what works from a game development perspective or game marketing perspective for sure. But I think it's interesting that somebody more involved in that space has a very similar feeling to me in that regard. At least the surface level feeling, maybe the core reasons for why those are needed is different. Yeah, I don't remember. I might have to go back and watch that video. Maybe he had some other commentary of like why people would show just like a CG trailer over everything else. But it's just really hard for me to care about your video game. But I guess, one thing I think we continue to struggle with on this podcast is the importance of characters and worlds, first and foremost. I feel like that is something that has become only more and more important in video games, and I have been sidelined by that probably. We look at video games, I think I'm looking at mechanics a lot of times. I'm looking for you to be doing something interesting. I think a lot of people don't care about that. I mean, obviously, I think there are people who do, but like, I think people just like, as long as you're making a solid video game, all we really care about is like, is this world exciting? Are these characters? Maybe not all they care about, but that is a priority in that process. That is me talking out of my butt about that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's true, but like my perception is that what I want out of these shows is not the primary desire of people. Which, you know, I don't know if you ever been into like marketing, a lot of times what you're trying to sell somebody is rarely the exact thing you're selling, right? You're trying to sell something that something gives you, right? Emotional response or problem you're solving and stuff like that. And so maybe it's just like, for me, it's very much a different type of problem that I'm trying to solve with games, because I don't think I look at games in the same way as other people. I think I'm looking for very different things a lot of times, right? So anyways, so yeah, those shows are long though, man. I kind of wish they were shorter. That's why it takes so long for me to get through, because I'm just like, I watch them like an hour at a time, and at some point I just start glazing over. I'm like, what is this game? Nexon's making a Berserker game that's like part of the like beat 'em up dungeon series they have or something. I don't know. Berserker or something like that. I don't know. Like, all those trailers just like kind of disappear into the background. There's like 5 trailers that look like The Witcher, and then a trailer that actually looked like a Witcher that actually was The Witcher. So like all those games just like look the same to me. They all have different characters with white hair or covered in blood. So it's just like, the white hair just come from Dritz or whatever, the like dark elf with white hair. I don't know. Don't ask me that. Don't ask me. More importantly, than the Game Awards though, GOG. Everybody loves GOG, right? Not good old games. We're talking about GOGH. We talked about this game, if you want to call it a game, app a long time ago, or at least a handful of podcasts ago. And the idea behind this is that it is basically a video game version of a like the chill and study YouTube videos. If you go watch those, it's like, hey, here's some chill music and an anime girl studying on a computer, and you can have this in the background while you study too. So the intention of GOG is to basically help you focus, and it creates a more app version of that whole experience. You have an avatar you can create. You can create a room and stuff like that. And the focus is to basically have a character in the background that you can use while it plays music. And it's like an aesthetic thing, right? It's just there to help you focus, essentially, or at least that's the intention, right? What is the point of that is a whole other thing. But I don't remember we talked about it before, if this was like part of the conversation or not. But 4Gamer had an article that was talking about the multiplayer mode that was recently released. And so what the multiplayer mode is where your avatar goes into like a public space to study with other people. And so you go to like a coffee shop, and there's other characters there working on their computers or like in notebooks and stuff. And I don't know if like the music is like synchronized between them or anything like that, but basically the characters all sit there and they like just sit there and study together and stuff. A little coffee sit up, there's a little outdoor area where they're sitting at too. And but they also really highlighted the fact that there is no chat function. The point is not to sit there and communicate with other people. The point is sit there and focus, but while still providing a sense of community while characters are out there, basically studying on their own kind of thing. So basically go into a space just to kind of like look at people and like, or maybe see other people there that are focusing and know you're focusing alongside them. I thought it was just like an interesting concept. There's some weird stuff with online stuff in particular. I don't know how much this matters these days, but I was reading a Twitter thread recently from a Final Fantasy XI player who, when they started the game, if you don't know, Final Fantasy XI starts with the cutscene. The character, they give you like a brief bit of dialogue, a little bit of a tutorial. It's a very short cutscene. And then you just get kind of like plopped in the world, and then you're just kind of like asked to figure out what to do next. That's just, you just do what you do. The person mentioned the fact that they saw other players running around when they got like loaded into the game, and then they got like really nervous because then they were like, oh, other people can see me running around, and they got really self-conscious about like what people would think about them seeing them run around and stuff like that. And like obviously nobody really cares, but like, I think when you're playing an online game for the first time in a space where like all these people who are unrelated to each other just doing their own tasks are visible and seeable in the world, I think it creates this like really interesting environment where like, oh, it's like technically you have this representation in the world of what you're doing that somebody else can look at and judge if they want to. So I feel like this kind of reminded me a little bit of that story of just like technically people being together and seeing the presence of other characters, despite the fact you're not interacting with each other, is like what builds that experience a little bit in a way that I thought was kind of interesting. So I think they said they're also coming to Steam now, so you can run it on a PC. Yeah, 2025. I think it's on mobile phones already, but it's a cute looking thing. So yeah, it's Ko-fi time. Hey ho, Demodori, thank you so much for donating. You donated, I think, all year this year, so thank you again, Demodori, for a 12-month donation thing. I don't know. What is it called? My brain's saying kill streak. You're not killing people with your donation, I hope. So, and then also Conspicuous Snoop donated at the end of this year. So thank you again, Conspicuous Snoop, for your donation as well. Nothing really new to say. I did get some news about my work where I am actually going to get my hours cut here. So, how I utilize the money for work stuff is maybe gonna have to change a little bit because I'm gonna have a lot more narrow time frame than I'm already working. So I think I'm still trying to figure out like what the new hours means for like my workflow. But I'm guessing probably what will happen is because the holidays are coming up here, I will probably try to utilize this fund to like fill in time when I would be normally trying to like search for new contracts or learn a different skill or something like that. I think that's going to be the plan. So sorry we continue to delay the usage of these funds on me working on a video. It's just going to be a really busy time, unfortunately, here in the short term. There's a lot of PCFX fan club kind of obligations I have here in the short term kind of thing. We'll get a little bit into workload stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit of that at the end of the podcast, but yeah. Otherwise, I don't really have any new updates, though. I could actually share the Nintendo video. One of the scary things that happened was like when I reformatted my PC is I actually reformatted my app data folder, which I was not. App data as a folder is hidden on your PC. And I use DaVinci Resolve right now for video editing, and DaVinci Resolve really likes to well, not really likes, it is structured in a way where it saves all your project data in the apps folder. So I accidentally nuked my entire apps folder. I was like, oh, well, boy, that means that like I will have to do the whole video again. And that will suck. But thankfully, because I have Backblaze as my backup, I was able to load back into my old C drive back up and pull that app data folder. And there weren't any updates recently enough that it was out of date. So I have basically, I believe, not the final, but the most recent up-to-date version of that. So yeah, I'm making progress on that video, or made progress on that video. But yeah, the whole PC exploding definitely like put a wrench in my plans, unfortunately. So but yeah, so sorry, not a lot of Ko-fi updates this week. Ko-fi, whatever it is. But I appreciate you guys for donating and all that stuff as we kind of get into the end of the year. All right, to wrap up the show, we're going to talk a little bit about content from this year and give a little kind of post-mortem of how this year went in general with content kind of stuff. And I'll probably leave the PCFX fan club out mostly of this discussion overall. I have thoughts about that, but I feel like those are problems I should solve separately and privately with Matt and all that stuff. But anyways, so when it comes to content, obviously the main one controller port channel did not get a lot this year. I think we only had one video this year. It's the Phantasy Star Online video. That was supposed to be kind of a warm-up to get me back into working on videos after, having a pretty intense catalog of work that previous year because I was really having a lot of hard time with self-control. I think working on videos in 2 to 3 hour chunks is like very smart though. Generally, I think that like just this paces things out really well. The biggest problem is just trying to find time to fit in that 2 to 3 hours of work. Generally, I think ideally I would love every week for me to put 2 to 3 hours in on a video, but it's like stuff like I feel like the last 3 months in general, just everything's been kind of on fire, unfortunately. And so it's like, oh yeah, I was gonna work on the video again last week, and then my PC exploded, and then like I've been sick multiple times this year, and and I had the Portland Retro Game Expo stuff, and then just a lot of like outings kind of stuff with people, and there's just a lot going on, unfortunately, the last like 3 months of this year, unfortunately. So, and then obviously getting my hours cut, now I have to do a little bit more work on trying to get actual work to pay bills, stuff like that. Yeah, so yeah, the only video that came out was Phantasy Star Online video. I'm generally happy with that video. Like I said, it wasn't ever meant to be the perfect video, and by the time I had like edited it, I did kind of recognize some issues with it. There's a whole post-mortem on the Ko-fi if you want to go read that. I believe that is freely available for anybody to read, so go check that out if you want to. So unfortunately, just not a lot to talk about when it comes to primary video things. I mean, those are the videos that take the most amount of work, and this year I've done a lot to kind of try to reduce my workload in a lot of different ways. I've spent a lot more time taking time for myself, and the balance of that's always been a challenge and continues to be a challenge, but it is in a better place than it was probably the last like 5 to 10 years in general. So it will continue to be a struggle, I'm sure. But I do think the OCP Plus content this year was really good overall. When it comes to reviews this year, I'm really happy that we are able to put out reviews for Cinnamoroll Fuwa Daiboken. I think that's a really cool video game, and that was like the first video we put out this year. I think the audio quality of the review was kind of messed up if I recall correctly, but that's a really cool like kids game with like a very kind of like speed running kind of aspect to it, kind of thing. In a lot of ways, I think Fuwa by Daiboken kind of painted the direction of this year a bit in my interest this year. I think it took a lot more focus and interest in games kind of generally aimed towards kids this year, and kind of appreciating the experiences with those. Kira Pop Princess as well, that kind of fell in there as well, but admittedly Kira Pop Princess we started last year, but what's it called, the video for it came out this year, and that video on OCP Plus channel was the best performing video this year. Is like 1,000 views, and more importantly, there's a lot of comments. It's one of those videos where I feel a little uncomfortable with the comments, because a lot of people being like very like, oh my god, thank you so much for making this video, this game was my childhood, and I really appreciate you kind of showing this off, which I do appreciate hearing those comments, and it's good. But it is one of those things where I think most of the time when I make those videos, I'm trying to convey to somebody who isn't typically the person to play those games, to like respect them in a way that makes sense, and like have an idea like what the value is. I don't think that video got any kind of comments regarding that, unfortunately, but I think it's hard when you're like, hey, here's a Kira Pop Princess video. You're gonna get a particular audience with that. So I think with the OCP Plus stuff in general, I think the limitations of all that is that I need to focus more on in terms of just like accepting feedback of people who are excited about those games, right? Like, even though it was on the OCP Plus channel, the Jeep Thrills video is a video all about people who are, the comment section of that video is all these kids who just like love Jeep Thrills and how they wanted to talk about it. The We Ski and Snowboard video as well, that's a similar thing, and all these kids. And like, one of the nice things about the We Ski and Snowboard video is like, my opinion of We Ski and Snowboard was not great, but there's a lot of comments on that video that were like, hey, this is why I like that game. And I'm like, awesome, cool. I'm so glad you shared that with me, because I understand why people like Wii Ski and Snowboard now. But those are old videos. I just want to kind of talk about the commenting aspect of that. But we had the Alex Rider video this year, the Walk It Out video, and the Arkwright's Fantasia video. I think all those were I'm glad those got out there as well. I think those are all very fun games and need to be highlighted in their own ways more. They didn't get like a ton of views, but they did get like between, I think, 200 and 600 views. The Arkwright's Fantasia video did get a decent number of comments as well. But yeah, I think all those, like Alex Rider is just a fun game overall. Walk It Out has like a really cool core concept, and then Arkwright's Fantasia, that game is very I think it is a game that needs more appreciation as a Wii RPG, personally, but I think we're probably at the point where Arkwright's Fantasia is going to get as much attention as it's going to get. So, but it's very cool. And then also, obviously, this is a little bit more recent, but the Trump Card 64 video, I really like that came out as well. So I think we had a good set of videos this year for like reviews and things like that. So I'm really happy with that. The unboxing videos and the repair videos, I kind of slowed down on those. Those are fun. I wish they were just a little a little less stressful to do because I think my camera setup's just too much of a pain. And so like I always worry about like camera setup being bad. But at some extent, I think I just need to let the camera setup be bad. It's a low budget setup in general. So I just need to not stress about it because those videos I think are mostly just about me talking for extended period of times. I don't think people really care that much about what's on screen. I mean, they would like to see what's happening, but I don't think they are like, I need the highest quality view of this GBA as you wipe it down with a little cleaning cough kind of thing. So, but I think all those were very good. Also, we had a pretty consistent rollout of content this year. I think maybe we were a little too focused on One Control Board Plus having like a decent quality rollout of content. I think that One Control Board Plus as a channel probably needs to be less focused on consistency in terms of that kind of content, at least. The main podcast, I think what we got out of this year for the main podcast is I think we really, I think I really learned a lot about how I feel about crypto games and why I look at them. You know, I've been kind of jokingly saying that, like, oh my gosh, at what point am I going to stop looking at these things? You know, it's not like I'm sitting here like, oh yeah, I'm a crypto believer or something like that, right? But, you know, the fact that it keeps getting talked about in Japanese games media and that there are people still playing those games and that, like, companies like Square Enix are still involved in that space, right? I feel like it's important for us to continue to monitor them and talk about them. You know, we are a channel, I think, generally that's about kind of highlighting kind of undervalued opinions on games. And even if we disagree of what crypto means kind of thing, I think there are enough people there that are engaging with it that we should understand, you know, what they're interested in. I think the way we kind of summarized it this year that I think helped me better understand what we were looking at and why we were looking at it was calling it gamified investment instead of crypto. I think that's a little bit more direct in exactly what exactly is going on there. However, in the same way that like exergaming is a thing, you know, these are things that are meant to like kind of emotionally manipulate you to do something. And while exergaming, I think there's some bad and good about exergaming, but generally, I feel like exergaming is generally a very healthy thing in terms of habit building and stuff like that, and helping encourage players to continue to play or to continue to exercise. That being said, each game has its own problems with that, but I feel like the gamified investment just has like a much greater ability to be abused, right? I think that's where I'm kind of landing on there, is just like gamified investment as a concept I'm not necessarily opposed to. I think it's generally accepted, I could be wrong, and, you know, don't take my advice on this, I don't know anything about it. I think it's generally accepted that like investing is really important, at least in America, for making sure you're taken care of in the long term. But I don't know if it's like the unregulated nature of it that exactly makes it a bit hard, but, you know, the possibility for these kind of negative outcomes and people to be abused and things like that in this process seems to be maybe the bigger issue here, right? There's the whole term like rug pull and things like that. And so, you know, the question is like, how much should gamified investment, which is like emotionally manipulating you to make investments that aren't necessarily about like, you know, the best financial investments, I think there's a lot of danger there. I think that's the kind of the conclusion we came to this year. I think a lot of times, like when we talk about, you know, why people don't like crypto games and stuff like that, I think we're in agreement that, like, yes, people don't like them, and I think there's a lot of good reasons why people don't like them, and I think we always should be very considerate of that here. And, you know, but at the same time, I think better understanding where that abuse happens and why that happens and what we're looking at and why those abuses happen in those spaces, I think is very important. So I don't know, maybe from the outside people are just like, well, you're just late to this train kind of thing. But I think the important thing is that we, like, you know, took the time to give it the consideration to get there. And, you know, I will say on my side, at least, you know, I'm not playing these games generally. I'm not, you know, investing these games. You know, I think we're very much viewing it from afar, and we're very much just kind of trying to understand why people who do play it and do invest in it kind of thing, right? And I think that Symbiogenesis article we read a few weeks back was like super helpful. And in general, the various like conferences we read about this year as well was also helpful. So, also, if you didn't know, we had the train customization horse racing game was this year as well. We talked about it. I looked into it, and we did talk about that early in the year this year. So, I think the podcast is really good for fighting games a little bit, because we got a chance to kind of like navigate exactly what my problems were with fighting games, and what I was trying to do with fighting games. I think sometimes it's really challenging to understand why you're doing what you do and when. And I think one of the things that I was learning through talking about on the podcast was, better understanding like why I engage with fighting games the way I do, and then also why I kind of like in some ways refuse to engage with fighting games in certain ways when people say you have to engage with fighting games in those ways. Trying to very deliberately avoid looking at things like frame data and stuff like that, because I think that's just not very user-friendly in terms of discussing what these games' appeals are, and trying to find what the words are to kind of describe the intricacies of these games that doesn't come down to like these very nitty-gritty details kind of thing that like are really hard for people to kind of grasp around. I think early this year, I thankfully had a chance to kind of review that a little bit. And then also understanding why like other fighting games really kind of failed to catch my attention, because even though I don't really like Granblue Fantasy's world, I don't really like the characters in Granblue Fantasy. Granblue Fantasy Versus is still the fighting game I played the most this year. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that like the 3-hit combo system in that game, like as your baseline attack, does a lot to remove pressure from the player to execute on some very basic elements of the game. It focuses it more on comboing together special attacks and things like that. I do think there are a lot of rules about fighting games that I don't particularly like. I don't like how obfuscated they are. I don't like how a lot of them are just like, oh yeah, you just have to like know that this will happen in this situation, and there's like nothing visually in the game that communicates that. You just have to have somebody tells you. That kind of stuff kind of bothers me, but I'm sure all video games have that. It's just with fighting games, I'm seeing it particularly because I have no real experience with them kind of thing. So I think it's better to approach it that way as well, rather than focusing too much on like the story aspects, because I think with Street Fighter 6, we saw that like teaching someone to play a game through Street Fighter 6's main story, I think is very, for me at least, ineffective. So, trying to rely on games for their story to teach these things, I think is something that is not necessarily good, in my opinion, right now. I think I'm not saying that it can't be done well. I just think Street Fighter 6 is probably the most like outward visually appealing way to do that. And I think it failed miserably in pretty much every regard. So, I think community interaction stuff probably still plays the biggest role in that. And it's really hard, I think, for players, unless you're really going out of your way to find a community or have somebody who's going to drag you in. I think that's probably a really hard thing to really grasp onto and enter any space kind of thing. That's not to say the fighting game community isn't accepting or inviting. I just think, there are hangouts people always will have in terms of entering spaces like that, card game shops or like, anything, any kind of fan base, right? There's a lot of things that I will be like, I don't know if I necessarily want to intrude in that space kind of thing, right? So I think those are like fun things we learned this year. I don't know if there's anything else from the short podcast that we really learned, but those are really kind of the two big things I feel like from this year was crypto games and fighting game stuff. Hot Pot Gaming. So we started that this year. I will say I didn't really have like a ton of ideas. Technically, we started it previous year, but I didn't publish any till this year. I don't necessarily know. Like the initial intention for Hot Pot Gaming was just be a more conversational show, and to kind of get rid of the need for me to be the expert on things, just to make the shows a little easier to produce. And thankfully, I think that has been pretty successful. They are very low in terms of views, but I think overall they've been very satisfying shows. Now, that being said, they're on my own One Control Port Plus channel, so I think, they're getting mixed up with all the other stuff. And so I highly doubt Hot Pot Gaming in its current iteration could ever be particularly successful, because it is kind of buried in a lot of stuff right now. I don't necessarily know. It's one of those things that like, oh, do you want to go start another YouTube channel or start another podcast feed? And it's just like, not really. So I'd have to really have confidence that the show would succeed in any meaningful way before I'd like actually try to push it forward in any way. But, right now, the One Control Port Plus channel is basically a self-sabotaging channel where it's like, I'm putting this here because I have no expectations it's going to succeed. And, unless you guys feel otherwise, generally, I feel like Hot Pot Gaming will never succeed in any way. So I'm not really focusing on, how to get it to the most people or not, right? So the goal of the show, I think, has been generally pretty unclear overall. But I think I've just been kind of feeling it out. And I think generally it's just been really good to reach out to people and just kind of talk to people. I think it is really good for me to put people like opinions and stuff and what people say online to faces, because I think it is really easy to kind of write people off if you don't ever like interact with them in any way, kind of thing, right? So I think it's been a very helpful show in that regard. I think overall, the lesson I learned this year from it, I think it is a very good show to go in with like very little expectations on my side. I think if I have too many expectations, we end up with like the Phantasy Star Online episode where I kind of wanted to end on a conclusion and I couldn't necessarily get us on that conclusion. And so I was a little like flustered by the end because I'm just like, well, I want it to be this. I wanted this to be the conclusion, but that's not the conclusion that they're giving, right? So like, but that's not the point. The point is to talk about the conclusion they came to, not the conclusion I wanted it to come to. So I think that is a big thing. But you know, having those more broad, open conversations early on does make it a little hard to know like how to position them later. When I did the podcast with Ray Barnholt, you know, I kind of kept it very broad, just trying to figure out where we were going with it. And I think ultimately that led to a show that like it was really hard for me to position it to sell to other people in some ways. Like, what do I entitle this show? And what is the purpose of this show? You know, it's a great conversation either way, but, you know, how do I present this to people kind of thing, right? So, but I think it's a really good show overall. I will say this, and I do want to keep doing Hot Pot Gaming. I do plan to keep doing that because I think it's just a really valuable show. And like one thing I will say is like, even though it's like a 3-month production time, I really like that it does take a long time because it gives me time to think about the conclusions. It has become, just like every other thing I do, a very selfish show in a lot of ways, where like, you know, at the end I'm talking about what I learned, not necessarily, you know, what, you know, somebody represents kind of thing, right? Which I don't know. Sometimes I think that's good. Sometimes I think that's bad. But hopefully I every time I make one of those outros, I run it by the person, just say like, hey, is this cool? Like, are you fine with this? And they're obviously, you know, that show is not like a hardcore journalism show where we're like, oh, whatever you say might be on record kind of thing, right? We're just kind of like, whatever. So if people say, I don't like the way you position my points here, I'm just gonna be like, yeah, whatever. I don't care. I'll just remove that from the show. So I'm not here to like do like hard hitting interviews, right? I'm here to just talk to you basically. So but I will say this, between the PCFX Fan Club show and the One Shulbert show and Hot Pot Gaming, there's too many podcasts right now. I feel like the last 6 months of this year, I have spent a lot of time editing podcasts. And I think what is going to happen is, I think as we go into the next year, the intention is that we're going to shift to a alternating podcast cycle. So what that is going to look like is basically, for now, the One Shulbert show comes out one day of the month, and then the Hot Pot Gaming show comes out one day of the month. I'm thinking the 1st and the 15th. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. That also means the day of which the show will come out will change, so it won't be like, you know, every other Monday kind of thing, right? I think that is going to be the intention going forward. I just it's just been too much podcast editing this year, and I don't like editing podcasts. I think editing podcasts is my least favorite editing to do, and it's what I spent most time on this year. So I think Hot Pot Gaming is a great show. I think One Shulbert has its own purpose for me talking to myself and stuff like that. And it does suck that, you know, we won't be able to talk nearly as much with One Shulbert being cut down to once a month. But I think ultimately, you know, I have to ask myself, you know, what am I doing with my time here? And, you know, if every other week is being taken up by a podcast, you know, it's tough. And, you know, this is alongside the PCFX Fan Club podcast, right? So, you know, not that that is coming out super often as well, but, you know, all these things kind of eventually kind of pile on top of each other and create problems. So I think that's going to be the intention as we go into next year. So, look out for that. That might be a January change. I don't know for sure, but yeah. So there we go. That's how I feel about this year when it comes to content. I wish it was a little bit more exciting on the video front, but you know, I think OCP Plus had a lot of good content this year at the very least. The channel did grow a little bit, but you know, pretty minuscule. It's like 160 subscribers, something like that. So, but I think we did get like 100 more subscribers since last year. So. I did change the name a few times this year as well, but it's still One Shulbert Plus at the end of the day. So anyways, thank you guys so much for coming. OneShulbert.com is the website. Hopefully the audio for this episode's fine. If not, I'll try to do some adjustments and stuff for next time. I might try to edit this in Vegas. I prefer editing in Sony Vegas versus DaVinci, but I've been having issues with DaVinci or Sony Vegas on this PC in particular, but I want to see if reformatting everything helps with the issue I was having. So I'm gonna try to edit this podcast in Sony Vegas and see if it sounds fine. So, but if not, you might get a little. There's like a little. Basically, the problem with Sony Vegas is that like there's a little audio glitch that happens once in a while, and so it just got so abundant and frustrating that I just opted to move over to DaVinci, despite the workflow not being my favorite on DaVinci. And after like a year or two of using DaVinci, I still feel like the workflow is not something I'm super used to. I mean, I can use it, it's fine, but I just prefer Vegas still. Like anytime I need to do something that's not like actually formally for the website, I still use Vegas. So anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks for coming. WatchMore.com is the website. Again, if you want to contribute to Game of the Year category, please go ahead and get that to me before December 23rd, so we can talk about that. And then otherwise, there should be a PCFX Fan Club episode coming up here shortly, so keep an eye out for that as well. All right, you guys have a great week. Bye.